Yeah. So, but Hegel's appreciation of architecture is precisely that it's anti-gravity. Make a building that, should be falling down and, somehow it's standing up. And the great cathedrals are the best example of that, where you have this, this whole program of proving that heavy matter, like stone, actually can ascend to heaven, and so on. So I think architecture is a very good example. I mean, both of a form that is itself overcome, but also the prototype of overcoming.
Yeah. I'm embarrassed I don't know where this occurs. Where would I find this in Hegel?
This is in Hegel's
the lectures on aesthetics.
theory, yeah.
Okay,
it's book 1 of his aesthetic theory.
Thank you.
So it's a lecture cycle he gave repeatedly in the last part of his life, where he was lecturing about everything. It's his transcripts of his lecture course, basically. So it's called Hegel's Aesthetics, 2-volume thing. It's as you say, in the first volume.
I have a sort of following question. I think it's not very well. It's all very raw, so I apologize in advance. I think that part of the the conversation that we're having is about when resistance comes from the position of power, or when power or authority resists, and this sort of echoes what I'm struggling with in my field work, so I'll just say several words about that. So in psychoanalysis, if I put aside life coaching for a second, we talk about a patient that voluntarily sees a psychoanalyst, a therapist, and subordinate itself to power in order to improve and become a free agent. And of course, that paradox of to power in order to become free. So we have that, and there's resistance in that moment because there's a paradox. So that's known. In Israeli life coaching, the beginning is sort of the same, because a trainee sees a coach in order to become better, and in some way subordinates itself to power. But what happens next is the part that I'm confused about, and I would love to hear what all of you have to say about. So what happens next is that the coach expresses resistance, and the coach that expresses resistance towards an imagined hostile society that that coaching sort of provides an alternative to. And in that way, I believe, and so the coach brings resistance, very, very strong sense of resistance to the coaching, and of course the trainee has his or her own resistance to the whole, power dynamics and everything that is already known. And then there's,
for 1 second, by training, you mean the person being coached or the person being trained as a coach?
Okay, so it's actually the same thing, because I've studied the training process, and the training process, in order to become a life coach, you have to undergo an intense,
just like psychoanalysis.
So this is same. So I've studied that process of the training, and so a trainee is both the name. That's the translation for a client. But in this context, it's also a trainee to become a life coach. So I'm talking about those who are becoming life coaches, but also are just clients at that process. So we have this resistance and resistance that meet one another and produce very particular kind of personhood. This is my focus. But I would love to hear what you have to say about that. I think it's sort of a cultural idiom, maybe, of power figures that present resistance as in order to become new or to present ingenuity. But I'm still sort of struggling with it, so I don't really have a question, just an open comment.
Can I ask historically, when would you say that this type of life coaching began?
Yeah, so it's not an Israeli phenomenon, we all know that, and it sort of immigrated or was imported to Israel at the turn of the century, so about 15 years ago,
Turn of this century. Okay, yes.
Yeah, at this it's all new generally in the world. So yeah, about 15 years ago, not 20. There isn't 20 years, and context-wise, I could say that around the 2000 Israel was undergoing quite a harsh economic crisis, as like a lot of places around the world. But also in Israel, that was like quite well known, and of course, a violent conflict that's ongoing, but was also very true at that moment of 2000, 2001, and some things that happened later on.
So you see, I'm sort of wondering where it was imported from, and it's just that my hunch is, or it reminds me of something that I'm very interested in, which is US counterculture and the sort of initiate schemes that one finds in Zen, and but anyway, I mean, it's just a sort of
it came from the States for sure. I mean, life coaching is American.
Yeah.
But you have to trace the specific histories of who brought it and how that turned out. Yeah, that's a whole different project that I'm not focusing on right now. Exactly like how it was brought up, but more how is it translated right now to be such a popular phenomena in contemporary Israel.
What's the relationship between life coaching in this respect? I mean, what's specific about the resistance that you're describing in life coaching to the resistance that I'm kind of staying away from psychoanalysis for the time being, because it seems to me we're talking, there's such an incredible difference between resistance, which is fundamentally located in the unconscious, and a resistance, which is determined as being conscious in the first place. It seems to me that we're talking about such different animals. But I would like to hear more about is what's the relationship between the resistance you're describing in life coaching and the resistance in other modes of. I mean, life coaching is not psychotherapy, right?
No,
it's not social work.
No, yeah, it draws.
But it's not connected to these things. So what defines its modes of resistance as compared to the resistance that you'll find as a social worker, you're trying to, or as a counselor, or as a short-term therapist who's trying to get results.
All right, so I think it draws a lot on psychoanalysis, though of course it's not psychoanalysis itself, but a lot of the therapeutic or clinical resistance that maybe a counselor wouldn't encounter, I guess life coaches would encounter too, when, for instance, they use free associations, just this is an example. They use projection methods, techniques, and they analyze dreams even sometimes, images. So they use a lot of psychoanalytic methods, and the sort of resistance that life coaches would encounter, I guess, would be similar to what you described earlier as this resistance to insight, or to actually heal, I would say maybe, and also the resistance to the authority of the therapist in many ways. I don't know if that's.
I should just tell you, I'm having a real problem with the reception here. It's very, very, the sound is very broken up.
Oh, could sit here while you talk to mine?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, maybe that help.
That helped.
Okay. The microphone.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
If you'd excuse me, I've got to do the school run. I'm so sorry, but thank you very much for the paper and the conversation. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye. Thanks everybody.
Yeah, do you want to sit here while you talk to me?
Can you hear me well now?
I can hear you.
Oh.
The image is something else.
Oh, sorry.
I have a big headache when this is over.
No. Sorry.
What was I saying? Oh yeah, so I mean the fundamental thing which defines the psychoanalytic concept of resistance is of course the transference, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is to say the figure of the attachment, negative or positive, it doesn't matter, to the figure of the analyst around whom the whole thing centers.
Yeah.
And so eventually psychoanalysis has to, that has to become the topic,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing around which, every session
centers at some at some level, and the end of analysis is essentially the working through of transference, not the. I mean, and the great difference between what I understand about life coaching is that this question of life outside seems subordinate in some sense to the question of what's going on actually inside the room, whereas my understanding is that life coaching is very centered on the present.
Yes, that's true.
Circumstances, no?
Yes, that's correct. At least that's the formal narrative, that is very much centered on the present time and what's going on outside and less inside. And
isn't it explicit short term? I mean, do you stay in coaching for a long time, or is it something that you sort of go to solve a problem and then get out?
Yeah, so formally it's supposed to be short, but it's not. It's eventually most people that do seek the help of a life coach do not just stay there for the 3 months short-term process, but they do stay in touch and work together on other topics as well. So it was supposed to be time constrained, very time efficient, very capitalistic in many ways. It doesn't turn out as time efficient as it maybe was planned in advance, but the question of transference is the question that I'm thinking of, and I need to dwell on it more, I guess, because coaches wouldn't talk about transference. They wouldn't talk about themselves as having any special input in the process of healing. They wouldn't even talk about healing, but let's say that yes. They wouldn't talk about transference, and there is some kind of standard life coaching model of behavior that sort of that cannot hold transference, because if there's a code, if there's such a strict code, then transference is sort of contradicted to it. But I need to think about it more. They definitely speak of not doing that. I mean, not having transference in the realm of life coaching, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't occur.
Right.
Like a formal narrative about it. Yeah.
Right. So that would be a problem rather than the fulcrum of the treatment.
Yeah.
For Freud, I mean, when he discovered transference, began as a problem. Oh my God, this isn't working because of the transference, and it became a problem. And then very quickly it became not simply a problem, but qua problem, it became actually the very possibility of it working. So without transference, there's no psychoanalysis. So it's so far from being an impediment to psychoanalysis that you've got to avoid and watch out for and kind of clear up as soon as it arises. It becomes in a sense the very object that makes psychoanalysis, the psychoanalytic session, a kind of laboratory, for what Freud at one point describes as this place in which an artificial illness can be developed and cultivated and examined, so that you can see the forces at work. And without that artificial illness, let's say the illness which is psychoanalysis itself, and nothing is going to ever change in the past or in the present. Yeah.
Great. No, it's a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thanks.
There are so many directions we could go in, but I was wondering if you could speak just a minute about your love, the image, which I think you call gorgeous, which it is, about the dream symbol, the dream navel. And I was just curious. Yeah, you have this quote. At a certain point, you say that their contrast is dialectically suggestive, and you say the dream symbol is too universal, and the dream navel is too idiomatic. And I just thought that was a really compelling moment, and you move on, and I just wondered if you could expand or elaborate a little bit for us about the dream navel. And I kept thinking I was wrestling with my compulsion to think of the dream navel as an origin, and trying to, at the same time, trying not to. But I just wondered if you could speak a little to that. It was very
right. Well, maybe we should just back up for a minute and talk about this dialectical pairing of the symbol and the navel, because I mean the symbol is typically the thing which gets dissed by Freud and not read by his followers, because it seems a little bit vulgar, right? It's not really It's not really, I mean, the symbol seems to be part of this phylogenetic heritage, or in some sense that we just kind of all have them, and you don't really need analysis because they're just given to you. You just need a dream book, and you can, a cigar is what it looks like, and a round thing is what it looks like, and aggregates mean this, and trips mean that, and trains mean that, and so on. So on the one hand, it seems very, they seem like very flat moments in the dream which don't need to be interpreted. In fact, can't be interpreted because they're kind of data. They're almost like what Freud calls day residues. Except in this case, they're centuries-long residues. They're just kind of part of the part of the currency rather than something that's once generated. So that's the sense in which they're too universal to be informative, and that's why one mode of resistance is that he describes quite amusingly as having dreams to please the analyst. So guess what? I dreamed about a cigar last night. I dreamed about I dreamed I was in this big room. I dreamed that I was in this. So that's a symbol on the one hand, which Freud says is not technically part of the dream work and not very interesting, but in fact it's the section and the interpretation of dreams that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that he can't stop going back to. So that's kind of a sign that there's something more going on. The dream navel, as you probably know, is this wonderful image. It appears a couple times in the interpretation of dreams. Of a knot. I mean, he calls it a navel because it is like an umbilical knot, where you're interpreting, you're associating, and somehow you come to the point at which not where things come to a close necessarily, but which the possibilities just become the directions in which interpretations could proceed becomes endless, and so therefore you come to a stop. And this is kind of an impasse in a certain sense in analysis. It constitutes an impasse for the analyst and for the analysand, because one can go no further out of this kind of hermeneutic richness. I mean, there's no particular place that's going to lead anywhere in particular, so you might as well just stop, which is a very defensive thing on the one hand, because as long as there's a navel, it means it's always a place where you can stop going. It's kind of, if there's a structural navel, that also means there's a structural limit to what can be interpreted. And Freud also goes on to say, furthermore, it doesn't need to be interpreted anymore. Not only can't you, but you don't have to. So it's kind of like a get out of jail card in a certain sense, because you're allowed to stop right there. That being said, it can't be. It's idiomatic in the sense that it's completely. It belongs to the dreamer's idiolect. I mean, there's no. It's his or her own particular set of associations that are shared by nobody. It's in that sense that it's not shareable. It can't. Right. It's not conducive to analysis. It's not conducive to the analytic setting. So kind of this zone of complete privacy, which amounts to muteness. So in that sense, it's the kind of the dialect. I was trying to think about this as the dialectical converse to this excessively public occurrence, which is the symbol. But what are you thinking about? What was intriguing you about this, Laurel? If you can speak a little bit closer to the thing, I think that's one of the things. And
I just really liked the image, and I was thinking about, I think in a moment in the essay you referenced the fact that it's not even translatable for the
dreamer.
Right, exactly, for the dreamer, that they themselves don't have access to it. And I was just thinking about that and where that's hovering and what work it is doing, and I was thinking about it in terms of translation, which is one way, a sloppy way perhaps, but it helped me highlight the dialectical dynamic you're expressing between the translatable symbol and the untranslatable navel. I was just curious about it. I was a moment where I paused in your essay and I wasn't sure exactly what you were referencing, and now it's much clearer for me. Yeah.
So an excessive translatability, which is the symbol, that it doesn't need to be translated because it's already translated, and universal. Everybody knows what a cigar is, and it's partly. It's partly Freud has created the symbol. So it's partly the discourse of psychoanalysis has itself engendered this language or this way of this way of recognizing things. But nonetheless, that's part of our patrimony now. It's part of our lexical patrimony. So, but an excess of translatability means things can't be translated.
Right.
Translation means everything's the same. So we're not translating anymore. That the differential space of translation has disappeared. Whereas the navel seems untranslatable equally untranslatable, but for the converse reason is that it's so idiomatic that it doesn't even survive the time of telling, which is I think connected to the great one of the other great subtleties of the dream of Freud's dream theories that he really thinks about why can't you remember your own dreams. It's not just about you can't tell your own dreams because the person doesn't understand them, but also the person doesn't really want to hear your dreams. I mean, the dreams are singularly untranslatable to begin with because they're either they're generally very boring. There's something about another person's dream which and Freud is very good on this. It makes them, on the one hand, just so intrinsically fascinating to you. Your dream is the thing you just, when you're losing it, when it's starting to fade away, you just want to have it so much and you want to talk about it, you want to tell it. And it's the most boring thing to anybody who has to sit through dreams, right? It's other people's dreams. But what's interesting is the gap between, which is a translational gap, which makes the dream actually untellable, also affects the dreamer, him or herself. I mean, that you can't, but by the time you remember it, you've already, by the time you wake up and even think you're remembering it, it's already being revised, it's already being, treated, it's already being glossed over and made into something it's not, and by the time you bring it into your session, the next day or that day, it's already been through a million retellings. So this inaccessibility of the dream itself, turns the whole dream into kind of navel, of which the navel is only it's a kind of synecdochal moment, of that generalized untranslatability. So I would say every dream is kind of a navel and has a navel.
It must, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, should I move closer to the microphone?
I think it helps the.
Okay, I'll speak into it here.